ask you what the square root of 25 is, you tell me 5. Okay? Why would you tell me 5? What do I mean by a square root? What number times itself gives you the 25? What number squared gives you 25? Yeah. And so, yeah, for that reason, the square root of 25 we say is 5. 5 squared is 25, so the square root of 25 is 5. Similarly, the cube root of 8 is what? 2, because why? 2 cubed, 2 3 times gives me 8. So 2 is the cube root. So this is because 2 cubed gives me 8. This is because 5 squared gives me 25. So safe to say there, a square root of a number is a number that you square to get that particular bigger number. Okay? Now, we have, of course, instead of having to write out each and every time square root the word, we do have symbols for this, right? What's the symbol for square root? Well, it looks something like this, right? Where the symbol is called the radical symbol. And in this case, it's the square root symbol, but the symbol itself is called, that's what we're talking about, radical. This is a radical symbol. And of course, square root of 25 means the same thing there. Now, what do we do for a cube root? How do we designate a cube root? Let's say we do the cube root of 64. Well, if you want to do a cube root, of course, you put a little 3 in the corner here, let's call it. Yeah, that designates a different root. So if you want a higher root it, if you will, you have to put that number here, and you can go, well, now the cube root of 64, what would it be? 4, okay? And, you know, you can do a 4th root of 16. That would mean the 4th root of 16, which means what to the 4th power gives you 16, which is 2. Okay. So yeah, this is our radical symbols, and if there's no number there, it's the square root. But if you want a cube root, you'd put a little 3 there. If you want a 4th root, you do a little 4, 5th root. You can do higher and higher roots like that. Okay? Now let me go back to the square root for just a second. There is a little bit about the negative square root. Let me talk about. The square root of negative 25, we'll talk more about it later, but for now, as far as a real number goes, is there a number that I can get for the square root of negative 25? Why not? That's not a real number. Let's just say it that way. Yeah, a negative times a negative gives you a positive, so we can't square. There's no real number I could square that would give me a negative 25. Like I said, if I tried negative 5, that wouldn't work because negative 5 squared gives me positive 25. There's no real number that I could square that would give me a negative 25. So we're just going to say, for now, this is not a real number. Okay? Now, contrast that to this. Same answer? Negative square root of 25. No, that's not the same answer because here the negative is on the outside, and so I'm just doing the square root of 25, which is 5, and then I negate that, so what's the answer? Negative 5. Okay, so the position there, inside or outside, means a lot as far as your square roots a negative on the inside, that's not going to be a real number, but a negative on the outside, that's okay. It's just going to be a negative answer. Now, does the same thing hold for a cube root? Cube root of negative 27. Now that one has the negative on the inside, but it's a cube root. Is that a difference? That's a difference, yes. That's going to be a negative number, isn't it? That's right. You're going to have an odd number of negative signs, if you will. What's the answer here? Negative 3. Yeah. I can actually get an answer for the cube root of negative 27 because if I cube negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, that does give me a negative 27, doesn't it? So, yeah, we're okay on that. So it doesn't work quite the same with the negatives. Those negatives on the inside for a cube root are okay. It's just, if you think about it, it's the even roots, square root, fourth root, where you run into a problem with negatives on the inside. But anyway, all right. So that's roots and radicals. Let's talk rational exponents, since that's what I'm trying to do here. Did you know that you can write a square root as an exponent? It turns out, yeah, your square root, say of, well, any number, call it x, that can be written as x to a power. Does anybody know what power the square root would be? It's not 2, because that would be x squared, and certainly if I square a number, that's different than square rooting a number, right? The square root of 4 is not the same as 4 squared, right? That's 2, that's 16. No, it turns out what you have to do is you have to do a fraction. And the fraction for the square root is 1/2 power. Now, hopefully you see there, the reason it's 2 is because it is a square root. If I do a cube root, guess what that's going to be? 1/3, yeah. Yeah, it turns out a root is going to be a denominator if you write it as a power. The root, this is the square root, second root, if you will. Yeah, the root matches up with the denominator if you do it as an exponent. So cube root is 1/3. Fourth root would be 1/4. Yeah, it's 1 divided by the root, whatever it is. Okay? That's how you do a square root as a power, and that it's a rational exponent. Rational, remember, rational is fraction, means fraction, so that's what we mean by a rational exponent. A root does translate into a rational exponent, fraction. Okay? So if I asked you then, what is 64 to the 1/2 power, what would you say? 64 to the 1/2 power. Well, that's going to be, since it's the 1/2 power, it's the square root. So I'm talking the square root of 64, and we know square root of 64 is 8. Okay? So yeah, if you have a fractional power like that, the root tells you, the denominator tells you the root, it's vice versa. Okay? All right? Now, back to the negative thing here. If I have parentheses negative 16 to the 1/2, and then contrast that to negative 16 to the 1/2, where there is no parentheses, is there a difference there? There is a difference here. This means, again, it's a square root of negative 16. And what about that? Can't do that one. Right. Not a real number. However, the negative 16 to the 1/2 power, we've talked about this before. When you don't have parentheses like this, the power can only hook up with what's right next to it. So this 1/2 power only goes with the 16, not the negative. So in other words, this is the 1/2 powers of 16. The negative is not in the 1/2 power, so this is negative, isn't it? Square root of 16, which is it just comes on over. That's right. The negative just comes on over, and so it makes it be an answer here. What's the answer? -4. Okay, so the top one was not a real number, but the bottom one is a -4 is the answer there. Okay? All right. And it is similar for any power. If you got negative 60, oh, did that one right. Let's do negative 1,000 to the 1/3 power. What does that mean? It's the cube root, isn't it? The denominator is the root. So in this case, I've got the cube root, don't I? So that's the cube root of negative 1,000. And by our discussion previously, that is a number. It is negative 10. Okay. Questions or concerns about those right there? All right, now let's change it up just a little bit like this. Let's say I've got (81) to the 3/2 power. This being different because the top number is a 3, whereas a while ago it was 1. The top number is something other than 1, and I still have denominator with it. Well, what do you think this means? Well, I do have a 2 denominator, and so that should be telling you square root, right? The root, the denominator is the root. So in this case, what root do I have? I have the square root. Okay? So I've got the square root of 81. Now, 3 is, well, it's not in the denominator. And so 3 is not a root. No, 3 is just a regular power, if you will. We're just going to take that as the 3rd power. Basically, I've got the 3rd power and I've got the 1/2 power is one way we could look at this, you see. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of carry that 3 along just as the 3rd power. I'm going to do the square root of 81, and then I'm going to do it to the 3rd power. What's the square root of 81? Square root of 81 is 9. Then I'm going to cube that. 9 cubed. 9 times 9 times 9. 729. With me on that? Let's try another one. Let's try 27 to the 2/3. 27 to the 2/3. Do I have a root there? Yes. What root do I have here? Cube root, yeah. The denominator is the root. So I've got the cube root of 27. And then I've got also a squared, so I'm just going to carry it along there. I'm going to do the cube root of 27 squared. Cube root of 27, 3. And then I'm going to do 3 squared, so I should get 9 for an answer there. Is that okay? One more. These rational exponents. How about 8 to a negative 1/3 power? 8 to a negative 1/3 power. Well, this, wanted to remind you here, when we have a negative exponent, I want to remind you that. What does a negative exponent mean? Doesn't mean negate the number. Remember what it means? Like if I had 4 to the negative 2, you flip it. That's right. It flips over. Negative exponent means flip it, basically. Okay? Yeah, I need to flip this over. In other words, put it 1 over, make the 8 to the 1/3 be here. And when I do that, it does change it to a positive exponent then, just like 4 to the negative 2 is 1 over 4 to the positive 2. With me? Remember that? Now, what have I got down here? It's 1 over, what does this mean? Cube root, right? 1/3 power means the cube root of 8. So it's 1 over the cube root of 8. Cube root of 8 is 2, so the answer is 1 over 2, 1/2. Yeah. So the negative exponent doesn't mean negate, it means flip it. Remember, the negative exponent means flip it over. All right. We talked about that a while back. Okay? Questions? Anything right there? What have we got?